The scent of cardamom and roasted hazelnuts hung heavy in the air as Clara Whitmore stepped out of the sleek black sedan and into the golden haze of Istanbul's late afternoon. The city hummed with life, horns bleated from somewhere across the Bosphorus, vendors called out in Turkish, and pigeons scattered as her heels clicked across the marbled steps of the Summit Hotel. She paused for a moment just outside the entrance of the Chiron Palace Kempinski, a five-star hotel turned international summit hub for the week. Its domed towers rose like something out of an Ottoman fairy tale, but Clara wasn't here for enchantment. She was here for justice, for truth, for the voiceless. And if she was being honest, something she'd always prided herself on, she was also here to outrun herself. Again, Miss Whitmore, a voice called from behind her. A young assistant with a lanyard and an armful of badges jogged up. "Welcome to the International Human Rights Assembly. You're speaking on the second panel tomorrow on digital authoritarianism?" Clara smiled politely. "Yes, that's right." Her accent was crisp, South London, refined by Oxford, hardened by late nights in The Hague. She adjusted the strap of her leather tote and nodded as the assistant handed her a welcome packet and gestured toward the hotel lobby. Inside, the air was cool and still, muffling the chaos of the city. Clara's eyes scanned the crowd. NGO workers, lawyers, diplomats, activists. The summit brought in the best and the boldest, and sometimes the worst. As she approached the elevator, someone brushed past her shoulder. She turned instinctively. "Sorry," the man said, stepping back. American accent, tall, sharp jaw, storm gray eyes. Clean-cut suit, loosely worn like he didn't quite belong in it. His gaze lingered for half a second longer than necessary. "Didn't mean to startle you." "No harm done," she replied, already shifting her attention. But he didn't walk away. "You're Clara Whitmore, right? From the War Crimes Tribunal?" Her stomach tightened slightly. "And you are?" He extended a hand. "Ethan Cross, State Department. I'm tagging along with the U.S. delegation this week. You're presenting on the Balkan Witness Protection Protocols, yeah? I've read your briefs." Clara shook his hand, cautious. "I didn't think anyone in Washington read those briefs." Ethan gave a crooked smile. "I do." The elevator arrived. They both stepped in. Silence stretched between them, but not an uncomfortable one. She caught his reflection in the mirrored walls, composed, intrigued, and somehow familiar. When the doors opened, she moved to step out, but he spoke again. "Clara, one more thing. There's a gala reception tonight, on the terrace. You should come. The sunset's supposed to be incredible." She turned her head, half a smile playing on her lips. "Let me guess. Networking opportunity, that, and good champagne." He was still watching her as the doors slid shut. Later that evening, Clara stood at the edge of the terrace, a glass of chilled champagne in hand. Below her, the Bosphorus shimmered like liquid silver, dotted with ferry boats and framed by the glowing minarets of the city. The party buzzed behind her, laughter clinking glasses, murmured diplomacy. She usually hated these things, the performative politics of it all. But tonight, something about the air, the electric pulse of it, kept her from leaving. "I was right," a voice said near her shoulder. "Sunset's a show-off." She turned to find Ethan again, dressed in a midnight blue blazer. His tie was gone. He looked disarmed, casual almost. Clara tilted her head. "Are you following me, Mr. Cross?" "Only if you keep calling me that," he replied, grinning. The smile disarmed her more than it should have. She sipped her champagne. "So what do State Department types usually do at these things? Besides charming, unsuspecting human rights lawyers?" He laughed. "Mostly, try to look important while avoiding real conversation." "I'm failing on both counts." Something about the way he said it made her pause. There was an edge to his humor, a deflection. They stood there in silence for a moment. The sky melted into deep blue, the last pink streaks fading. "Istanbul suits you," he said, suddenly softer. Clara turned her head. "You don't know me." "No," he said, "but I'd like to." She wasn't ready for how quickly her guard wanted to slip. It had been a long time since someone spoke to her like that, without pretense or politeness. Just honesty, like a thread pulling loose something tightly woven inside her. "Careful," she said. "You might regret that." He leaned on the railing beside her, their arms almost touching. "I doubt it." The hallway was quiet, dimly lit by antique sconces that cast warm amber halos on the marble walls. It was nearly midnight. Clara had been walking back from a late strategy session with a human rights team from Oslo, her head buzzing with legal jargon, caffeine, and the kind of moral weight that always accompanied these international gatherings. She turned the corner toward her suite when she heard footsteps behind her, steady, not hurried. Her body instinctively tensed. She was used to paranoia, used to watching her own shadow. The cases she took, the people she defended, not all of them were popular. Not all of them were safe. But when she glanced back, it wasn't a threat, it was Ethan Cross. He wore the same clothes from earlier, though his jacket was now slung over his shoulder. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his forearms, and his hair was slightly tousled like he'd run his hand through it too many times. There was a coffee stain just below his collarbone. She stopped walking. "You again." He gave her a sheepish smile. "Not stalking, I swear. I couldn't sleep. Figured I'd go down to the lounge." "You?" Clara hesitated, debating whether to end the conversation right there, or indulge the curiosity that had been steadily blooming since that sunset on the terrace. "Couldn't sleep either." Ethan nodded toward the end of the hallway. "They've got this ridiculous pastry cart down there. Want to split a croissant with a stranger?" A tiny laugh escaped her lips. "You're not much of a stranger anymore. But still a little strange," he said, grinning. They walked together in silence for a few paces, a comfortable rhythm forming between them. When they reached the small wood-paneled lounge tucked away at the back of the floor, Clara was surprised to find it empty. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the velvet furniture. A sleepy staffer brought over coffee and a plate of warm pastries. Ethan poured her a cup without asking how she took it. She noticed. And she noticed how he sat beside her, not across, close enough to feel the heat from his arm, but not too close to make her pull away. "You always this charming with international lawyers?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Only the ones who scare the hell out of war criminals," he replied. She gave him a sideways look. "That sounds admiring." "It is." A beat passed. Clara stared into her cup. "My work, it's not very romantic, you know. People think it is. Defending dissidents, protecting whistleblowers, fighting dictators. But it's messy, lonely." "I know," Ethan said quietly. She looked up at him. "Do you?" He didn't look away. "More than I'd like to admit." Clara leaned back on the couch, watching the firelight dance in the glass. "So what's your story, Ethan Cross?" "You know mine. All that's left of it anyway." Ethan hesitated. It was barely perceptible, but she caught it. A flicker of something guarded, trained, even. "I used to be idealistic," he said eventually. "Then I learned idealism doesn't always survive clearance levels." "State Department?" she asked, studying him. He smiled tightly. "Yeah, mostly behind the scenes. Memos. Reports. The kind of work no one remembers." It was a rehearsed line. Clara could hear it, feel it, but she let it hang there. "Sounds lonely," she echoed his earlier word. They sat in quiet for a while. Not awkward, not forced, just quiet. And then, somewhere between the second pastry and the bottom of the coffee cup, Clara laughed. Not politely, not diplomatically. It was a real laugh, unfiltered and warm. And Ethan looked at her like he'd found something he didn't know he'd been searching for. "I should sleep," she said, finally, standing up. "Big panel tomorrow." Ethan stood with her, suddenly reluctant to let the moment end. He followed her to the hallway, and they walked the final few steps to her door. She turned to him, resting a hand lightly on the doorknob. "I still don't know if I should trust you," she said softly. Ethan's eyes met hers, unreadable. "You shouldn't." "Not yet." Clara tilted her head, surprised by the honesty. "But I want to," she admitted. A long beat passed. Ethan leaned in, not to kiss her, but just close enough that she could feel his breath. "Then let's see where this goes." And then, without touching her, he turned and walked down the hallway. Clara stood frozen, her heart knocking against her ribs, not from fear, from possibility, from the sense that this man was either going to break her heart, or change her life. Maybe both. The next morning was a blur of panels, speeches, and networking. Clara was used to the high-stakes intensity of global human rights conferences, but something about the air in Istanbul felt different this time. It wasn't just the city's contradictions, where modern skyscrapers brushed shoulders with ancient mosques, or the dichotomy of luxury and poverty that painted the city's streets. It was Ethan. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than he was letting on. That night in the lounge, she'd caught a glimpse of something behind his guarded demeanor. A truth he was unwilling, or perhaps unable, to share. Still, duty came first. She had a panel to moderate, a dozen lawyers to keep in line, and a presentation to nail. The clock was ticking down to her keynote address, and her focus needed to stay sharp. No distractions. When the time came, Clara found herself standing at the front of a grand conference room, addressing a crowd of diplomats, activists, and world leaders. The topic was as heavy as it was urgent: digital authoritarianism and the erosion of privacy in the digital age. It was a subject Clara had been passionate about for years, especially as governments increasingly use technology to silence dissent. She scanned the room, her nerves fluttered, and then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted Ethan, sitting in the third row, his usual confident expression replaced with a hard, almost unreadable look. His presence at the summit wasn't unusual, but the way his eyes were locked on her made her feel like she was under a microscope. The presentation went smoothly, her points hitting home with the audience, but every time she looked up, Ethan's gaze followed hers. It wasn't just admiration, there was something more calculated in his stare, something that made her uneasy. When the panel concluded, there was a brief applause. Clara stepped off the stage, trying to shake off the prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She made her way to the back of the room, where a small group of colleagues waited to speak with her about the next phase of the summit. Just as she was about to engage, a familiar voice stopped her. "Clara." It was Ethan, emerging from the shadows with that same smooth, measured tone. "Can I have a word?" he asked, his expression unreadable. Clara's stomach tightened. "Ethan, now really isn't a good time. I've got a full schedule today." I know you're busy." He didn't back down, stepping closer. "But this is important. It's about your client, the one from Turkey. The journalist. You know the one." Clara froze. The journalist. She'd been defending him in court for weeks, fighting to protect him from extradition, from the consequences of exposing government corruption. If Ethan was bringing him up now, it wasn't for a friendly chat. "What about him?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. She already suspected the direction the conversation was heading. Ethan's face darkened. "There are certain things you don't know, things you should know, for your own protection." Clara frowned, crossing her arms. "What are you talking about?" "I can't get into the details here," he said, glancing around the crowded room. "But your client is connected to something bigger than you think. It's not just the Turkish government after him." The words hit her like a cold wave. She studied his face closely, trying to gauge whether he was bluffing. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice lower now, laced with suspicion. Ethan's eyes softened, just slightly. "I'm saying he's not just a journalist. He's caught up in a web of espionage, and I'm the one who's been ordered to track it." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Espionage? That's absurd." "It's not," he replied quickly. "Look, I can't explain everything, but you need to be careful. There are forces here that want to silence him, and you. I've been asked to monitor the summit, but more than that, I've been asked to make sure your investigation doesn't go too far." Clara's mind raced. She had no reason to trust him, not when he was wrapped in the same bureaucracy that had always worked against the people she was trying to protect. But something in his eyes, something raw, vulnerable, made her wonder if for once, someone in power wasn't playing the same game. She shook her head, trying to focus. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he said, his voice softer now, "I think you deserve to know, and I think you deserve a choice." Clara stood there for a long moment, processing the weight of his words. She was a lawyer, a fighter, but there were moments when even the strongest defenses couldn't hold back the tide of uncertainty. This was one of those moments. "I need time to think," she said finally, her voice cold and composed. Ethan nodded. "I'll be in the lobby tonight, if you want to talk." And then he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Clara standing alone, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her shoulders. Clara barely slept that night. Her mind swirled with everything Ethan had told her. The journalist she was defending, the one she believed was being unjustly persecuted, now seemed to be a pawn in a much larger game. Espionage? The idea of it felt foreign and almost absurd, but Ethan had been so serious, so insistent. By morning the weight of it all was still pressing down on her chest. The conference was in full swing, but Clara couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. She had to find out more about the journalist, about what Ethan had said. She wasn't naive enough to think he had all the answers, but he was part of something larger, and that made him a piece of the puzzle she couldn't afford to ignore. The day's events were a blur of meetings, diplomatic sessions, and whispered conversations in hallways. The pressure of the summit weighed heavily on her, There was no time to investigate further, no space to breathe without the burden of her responsibilities. But the more she tried to focus, the more Ethan's words gnawed at her. By late afternoon, she found herself walking down one of the ornate hallways of the hotel, heading toward the quiet lounge area, where she'd met Ethan the night before. Her heels clicked on the polished floor, a rhythmic sound that matched the pulsing beat of her thoughts. She wasn't sure if she was going to find him, wasn't sure if she was hoping to see him again. But when she rounded the corner, there he was, leaning against the marble pillar by the door, his posture casual but his eyes sharp. Watching her approach, Clara, Ethan said, his voice smooth, "We need to talk." She hesitated, eyeing him with a mix of wariness and curiosity. "About what?" "About the journalist," he said quietly, stepping closer. "We're not exactly on the same side here, but I don't want you to get hurt. I should have told you sooner." Clara's heart skipped. "What do you mean by that?" He glanced around to ensure no one was listening. His voice dropped to a low whisper. "Your client? He's not just a whistleblower. He's been involved with intelligence for years. We've had a file on him for months." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "Intelligence? You're saying he's working for you?" Ethan looked pained, but his expression was unreadable. "Not exactly, but he's been feeding us information. We believe he's been recruited, and the government, both Turkish and other powers, are using him to manipulate the media. This goes beyond your case, Clara. It's not just about human rights anymore." Clara was silent for a moment, trying to digest the words. She felt betrayed, torn between everything she believed in and what Ethan was telling her. "But why didn't you tell me this sooner?" she asked, her voice tight. "If you knew all this, why wait until now?" Ethan took a step back, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't want to get you involved, Clara. The higher-ups, the powers in charge, they want to keep this quiet. I didn't want you to get caught in the crossfire." Clara shook her head in disbelief. "You think I'm going to back out now, because it's messy?" "No, I don't care if it's messy, Ethan," she interrupted, her voice rising with frustration. "I've been fighting for this man's freedom. You have no idea what it's like to represent someone who has everything to lose. So don't you dare stand here and tell me what I can and can't handle." Her words hung in the air between them, sharp and charged. She could feel the tension in the room, the weight of the secrets they both carried. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. After a long pause, Ethan exhaled slowly. "You're right, you're right. I should have told you sooner, but I need you to understand, Clara. There's more going on here than just a case. You're in over your head." Clara's gaze hardened. "And what exactly do you want me to do about it? Do you think I'll just walk away because it's dangerous? Because it's complicated?" "No," he said quietly. "But I think you need to realize just how deep this goes." Clara stood there, staring at him, her mind whirling. The words felt like a betrayal, like a lie wrapped in truth. But the more she thought about it, the more she understood the stakes. If everything Ethan had said was true, if her client was involved in something larger, more dangerous than she realized, then she was already too deep to back out now. But the lie still lingered in her chest. Ethan had lied to her. He had kept the truth from her, no matter how justified he believed his reasons were. "Fine," she said finally, her voice cold. "Then we'll deal with it. But know this, Ethan, there's no turning back for either of us." That evening, Clara met with her colleagues from the summit in the grand ballroom for a formal dinner. The evening was supposed to be a celebration of the progress made on human rights policies, but Clara felt far removed from the grandeur. As the speeches droned on in the background, her mind kept drifting back to Ethan's words. Was he lying to her? Was there something more to his involvement in all this? She pushed those thoughts aside when her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Unknown. Clara, your client isn't who you think he is. Be careful who you trust. There's more at play here than you realize." Her stomach sank as she stared at the message. Who could have sent this? And what did they know? Before she could process the message further, the ballroom doors opened, and Ethan walked in, his eyes scanning the room, until they landed on her. He gave a subtle nod, his gaze unreadable, and she couldn't help but wonder if the message had come from him. The days blurred into one another after that evening. The summit was drawing to a close, but the tension between Clara and Ethan only grew. The weight of the lies, the secrets and the uncertainty pressed heavily on her shoulders. Every time she saw him, every word he spoke, she wondered if she was being manipulated, if she was playing right into his hands. Still, she couldn't ignore the facts. The journalist, her client, was involved in something bigger than she could have ever imagined. If what Ethan said was true, the very foundation of her case was built on a lie. And then there was the message. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that someone else knew more than they were letting on. She wasn't sure whether to trust Ethan or the cryptic message from the unknown number. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized one thing: she was dangerously close to the truth. The following afternoon, Clara took the opportunity to visit the Turkish embassy. Her meeting with the ambassador had been set up weeks ago, and she had intended for it to be a routine conversation about her client's case. But now, given everything she'd learned, and the increasing suspicion gnawing at her, she wondered if there was more the ambassador knew. As Clara entered the embassy building, the marble floors gleamed under the soft light, giving the place an air of quiet sophistication. She was led into a sleek, minimalist conference room, with a view of the Bosphorus, and soon Ambassador Alkan walked in. The ambassador was a man of middle age, sharply dressed, with the kind of polished demeanor that came with years of navigating high-stakes diplomacy. His eyes were sharp though, and Clara could tell he wasn't an easy man to read. "Miss Whitmore," Ambassador Alkan greeted her with a polite smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I trust you've been enjoying your time in Istanbul." "Mostly," Clara replied, returning the smile, "though I'm here for more than just the summit. I'm sure you're aware of the case I've been working on, the journalist facing extradition. I'd like to discuss some concerns I have." The ambassador took his seat across from her. His expression was neutral, but Clara could feel the weight of his gaze. "Of course. Please go ahead." Clara wasted no time. "There are some things about my client's background that I'm beginning to question. I've learned that there may be more to this case than just political persecution. I need to know if there's anything you can tell me about his connections, specifically to the Turkish government." Ambassador Alkan's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before he adjusted his posture. He leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepled together. "I can assure you, Miss Whitmore," he began, his voice calm, "that the Turkish government has no interest in persecuting journalists or activists without cause. We're committed to transparency and the protection of human rights." Clara felt a pang of frustration. She had heard this rhetoric before too many times. "And yet, my client is facing extradition for exposing corruption. If he's truly guilty of espionage or working against the government in any way, shouldn't he be prosecuted for those crimes, not silenced?" The ambassador's expression tightened, just the faintest hint of irritation. "Miss Whitmore, I understand your position, but you must understand that not all information is as it appears. There are forces at work here that go beyond individual cases." Clara leaned forward, pressing. "What forces? If my client is truly a whistleblower, why does his case seem so tangled? Why does it feel like there's something you're not telling me?" Ambassador Alkan's eyes narrowed. For a brief moment, Clara thought he might push back or get defensive, but instead, he offered something unexpected: a small smile. "I'm afraid I can't help you any further, Miss Whitmore. Some matters are not for public discussion." Clara stood, her stomach churning with unease. "I see," she said tightly, her mind racing with unanswered questions. "Thank you for your time, Ambassador." As she turned to leave, the ambassador's voice stopped her. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his tone slightly softer, "be careful. Not all the pieces of this puzzle are meant to be put together. Some things are better left alone." Clara froze, her hand on the door. The warning hung in the air like a threat she couldn't yet decipher. She walked out of the embassy with a sense of urgency, the ambassador's words echoing in her mind. There was something going on behind the scenes, something deeper than she had realized. But what, and why had he warned her? That evening, Clara met with Ethan again in the hotel lobby. He was waiting by the bar, casually sipping on a drink. His eyes flicked toward her as she approached, his expression unreadable. "You wanted to talk?" she asked, her tone blunt. Ethan's eyes softened slightly as he placed his glass down. "I did, but I think you already know what I'm going to say." Clara's heart raced. "Do I?" "You're not stupid, Clara," he said quietly. "You've figured out that there's more to your case than you've been told. And now, I think you're starting to realize the stakes." She crossed her arms, taking a deep breath. "I've spoken to the ambassador. He's hiding something, and I think you're involved in it." Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at her with the kind of intensity that made her feel like he could see right through her. "I didn't want you involved in this. But you're already in it, Clara. And now, we need to figure out how far you're willing to go." Clara's mind whirled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that everything you've been told about your client is a lie, and you need to decide if you're willing to uncover the truth, no matter the cost." For the first time, Clara felt the full weight of the situation pressing down on her. She was in the middle of something far more dangerous than she had imagined, and the only person who might help her navigate it was Ethan. But could she trust him? Clara's thoughts swirled in chaos after her conversation with Ethan. She was in too deep now to turn back, and every word he spoke seemed to carry a weight she wasn't prepared for. The diplomat's cryptic warning, the journalist's hidden ties, and Ethan's undeniable involvement. Everything was connected, and yet it felt like the pieces weren't quite fitting together. As she walked back to her hotel room, the dimly lit corridors felt longer than usual. The hum of distant conversations seemed to echo through the hallways, but Clara couldn't focus on any of it. Her mind was fixated on the one question that had been gnawing at her for days. Who could she trust? In the stillness of her room, Clara paced back and forth. The message from the unknown number still lay unanswered on her phone, and each time she looked at it, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Was it a warning? Was it a trap? Finally, she made a decision. She couldn't sit idly by anymore. She needed answers, answers that only one person could provide her client. The journalist Zeynep had been relatively silent for the past few days. Clara had been working tirelessly on his case, but she had barely spoken with him since the last court hearing. She had thought he was keeping a low profile, but now Clara realized that silence could be just as dangerous as deceit. She quickly dialed his number. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before Zeynep's voice answered. Tired but familiar. Clara, he said, his voice strained, as though he'd been expecting her call. I need to see you, Clara said, her tone urgent. Where are you? Zeynep hesitated. I can't come to you. It's too risky. Clara's frustration bubbled up, but she forced it down. Then I'll come to you. Meet me at the cafe near your apartment. In an hour. No one can know. There was a brief pause before Zeynep sighed. Fine, I'll be there. An hour later, Clara stood in the cozy, dimly lit cafe by Zeynep's apartment building. The air was thick with the scent of espresso and Turkish sweets, but Clara hardly noticed. She was too preoccupied with the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. She sat at a small table by the window, glancing occasionally at the clock, her nerves growing with every passing minute. When Zeynep finally walked through the door, Clara's breath caught in her throat. He looked different, darker, more tired than before. His once confident posture was now hunched, his eyes shadowed with an unease that Clara hadn't seen in him before. Without a word, Zeynep sat down across from her. His eyes met hers briefly, then flickered away as if he couldn't hold her gaze. Clara's voice was soft but firm. What's going on, Zeynep? I need the truth. I've been hearing things that don't add up. I need to know what you're really involved in. Zeynep shifted uncomfortably in his seat. You don't understand, he murmured, looking out the window instead of meeting her eyes. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to expose the truth. Expose the truth about what? Clara pressed, leaning forward. You've been keeping something from me, haven't you? Ethan, he said. Zeynep's face drained of color at the mention of Ethan's name. He immediately looked around, as if the mere mention of Ethan's name was dangerous. Don't talk about him here, Zeynep hissed, his voice low and urgent. He's involved in all of this. He's not who you think he is. Clara's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Zeynep took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. Ethan, he's not just a diplomat. He's not just some well-meaning ally. He's been watching me for months. He's been pulling strings from the very beginning. Clara's pulse quickened. Watching you? Why? Because I know too much. Zeynep whispered, his voice barely audible. I was recruited by the Turkish government years ago. But it wasn't just about politics. It was about something bigger. I got too close to a network that's far more powerful than I ever realized. And now, I can't escape it. Clara's mind raced. You're telling me you were working with them? All this time? Zeynep shook his head. No. I didn't know what I was getting into. At first it was just about getting the truth out, but the deeper I dug, the more I realized how far the web stretched. I became a target. Clara's breath caught in her throat. A target? He nodded, his expression tormented. They've been using me. All along, I was being fed information, but they made sure I only saw what they wanted me to see. I was being manipulated into exposing the very people who were helping me. And now they're trying to shut me down. Clara was silent for a long moment, digesting everything Zeynep had said. The gravity of it all hit her like a punch to the gut. He had been used, just like she had been. They had all been pawns in someone else's game. I can't protect you anymore, Clara said finally, her voice steady but edged with sorrow. You're too deep into this. Whoever is behind all of this has more power than you and I combined. Zeynep's face twisted in desperation. You don't understand, Clara, I've already been marked. The moment I uncovered the truth, they made sure I'd be silenced, but I can't stop now. I can't let them win. Clara looked at him, torn. He was right. She had already come too far, and backing out now wasn't an option. But the path ahead was more dangerous than she had ever imagined. If Zeynep was right, they were up against forces much larger than they could handle alone. I don't know if I can help you anymore, Clara whispered, her voice heavy. But I'm not backing out. Not now. But we have to be smart. Zeynep nodded slowly, his eyes haunted. Then we'll do this together. But I can't promise you that it'll be easy. It's already too late for that. As Clara stood to leave, she felt the weight of their shared silence. They were both trapped in a web they couldn't untangle. And the only way out was to face the shadows, no matter what they might uncover. Clara's mind spun as she walked out of the cafe and into the night. She could feel the walls closing in, the sense that time was running out. She had made a decision to keep going, to uncover the truth, but now she realized that nothing would be the same again. The questions remained, unanswered and looming. But one thing was certain, someone would have to pay for the lies. And Clara was willing to be the one to uncover them, no matter the cost. Clara's world had shifted irrevocably in the last few days. Every conversation, every decision, every look from Ethan or Zeynep now carried a weight she hadn't anticipated. The lies, the deception, the hidden agendas, it was all too much for her to process, yet she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't walk away now. But she had no illusions anymore. The stakes were no longer confined to a legal battle. This was about survival. Clara had come to Istanbul, seeking justice for a journalist she thought had been unjustly persecuted by a government that sought to silence him. Now she was staring down a labyrinth of corruption and espionage, with very few allies to help her find the way out. She had just finished her meeting with Zeynep, and her mind was still racing. He had been completely right about everything: the manipulation, the betrayal, the web of lies that had kept him in the dark. He'd been a pawn, just like her. And now both of them were trapped in a game much larger than either had anticipated. As she entered her hotel room later that night, Clara placed her phone on the table and stared at the message from the unknown number again. Unknown. You've been warned. Don't trust anyone, not even Ethan. She had no idea who was behind the message, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt like a final warning, a warning she had to take seriously. The truth was out there, but every move she made seemed to take her closer to a dangerous precipice. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her temples. She needed to regroup, to clear her head, but the feeling of being constantly watched made it almost impossible to relax. Her thoughts turned to Ethan. He had become more distant lately. He had been the one person she thought she could trust, someone who had been in the trenches of this web before, and might be able to help her navigate it. But every time she looked at him, the doubt gnawed at her. Was he truly trying to protect her, or was he manipulating her for his own ends? She couldn't afford to make another mistake. She needed to know where Ethan stood, and she needed to know now. The next morning, Clara didn't waste any time. She knew that confronting Ethan was no longer a matter of mere curiosity. She had to know if he was still on her side, or if he was playing a different game altogether. The lobby of the hotel was quiet, save for a few early risers enjoying their coffee. Clara spotted Ethan sitting at the bar, a glass of water in front of him, his eyes glued to the screen of his tablet. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Clara," he said, his voice neutral. "I didn't expect to see you so early." She didn't sit down. Instead, she leaned against the bar, crossing her arms. "I need answers, Ethan. I can't keep going like this." Ethan's gaze softened, but only slightly. "I know. I never wanted to drag you into all of this. But it's bigger than we thought, Clara." "Bigger," she repeated, her voice tight. "You've been hiding things from me, Ethan, things that could have changed everything." He set down his tablet, leaning forward. "I've never meant to lie to you, Clara. But sometimes the truth is more dangerous than the lie. You need to understand, if I had told you everything from the start, you would have walked away, and we both know that wouldn't have helped anyone." Clara's eyes narrowed. You don't get to decide what I can or can't handle, Ethan. I'm in this now, and if I'm going to keep going, you need to tell me everything. No more lies. Ethan exhaled deeply, and for the first time Clara saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. I don't know how much more I can say, Clara. This goes deeper than you think. The people behind Zainab, they're powerful. More powerful than either of us. They're watching everything, every move you make, every move I make. Clara's heart skipped. Who are they? Who's pulling the strings? Ethan's expression hardened. I can't give you names. I can't risk it, but I can tell you this, there's a faction within the government here that's far more dangerous than anyone knows. They've been operating in the shadows for years, and they've infiltrated everything. They use people like Zainab to further their own agenda, and now they want him silenced. Clara felt a chill crawl up her spine. And you, what part do you play in all of this? I'm not their ally, Clara, Ethan said, his voice earnest. But I've been forced to work with them. The things I've done, the things I've had to say, it's not who I am, but I've been trying to stop them. I've been trying to protect you, protect Zainab, and stop them from going any further. Clara's mind raced. Then why didn't you tell me sooner? Why the secrecy? Why keep me in the dark? Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration visible on his face. Because it's too dangerous. Every word I say could be a trap. I don't want to risk you being caught in the crossfire. Clara felt a twinge of something between frustration and sympathy. She understood the danger, she understood the weight of the decisions he'd had to make. But she also understood that her future and the future of Zainab depended on the choices she made now. I can't keep playing this game with you, Ethan, she said, her voice cold but resolute. I need to know that you're with me. No more half-truths. No more lies. If we're going to take them down, we do it together. But I need to know you're not holding back anymore. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then with a heavy sigh, he nodded. All right, I'll tell you everything. But you need to understand, Clara, the truth is more dangerous than you realize. Clara sailed the tension in her chest, easing just slightly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in this world of lies and deception, sometimes a small step forward was all they could ask for. The next few hours were a blur. Ethan led Clara to a discreet location, an old safe house that had been used by the few trusted allies who still believed in the cause. Inside, Ethan showed her documents, maps and files that painted a disturbing picture. There was a network of corruption, spanning across countries, involving not just the Turkish government, but several international organizations as well. Zainab had been an unwilling player in a much larger scheme, a scheme that Ethan had been trying to dismantle from the inside. But now, it seemed as though the walls were closing in on them both. As Clara pored over the documents, she realized that she was standing at the edge of something far darker than she had ever imagined. And the only way forward was to go deeper into the heart of the conspiracy. The decision had been made, she couldn't back out now. The pieces were all falling into place, and the truth, no matter how dangerous, was the only weapon they had left. Clara's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents Ethan had given her. The weight of what she was learning was sinking in deeper than she cared to admit. The trail of corruption she was now following led to a nexus of power far beyond the Turkish government, an international network that had its claws in almost every level of authority. The more she uncovered, the more she realized how intertwined her life had become with these shadowy figures. Ethan stood across the room, his arms crossed as he watched her process the information. He had given her everything, files, notes, intercepted communications, but the look in his eyes suggested he knew the real weight of what this would cost her. It was the same look he'd given her the first time they met, when he tried to warn her about the danger of the case she was taking on. I didn't want you involved in all of this, he said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. I thought you could leave, get out while there was still time. Clara didn't look up from the files. Leaving is not an option now, Ethan, we're in this together. We have to finish it. Ethan sighed, stepping closer. You don't understand how deep this goes. We're talking about people who have controlled entire governments, manipulated public opinion, and orchestrated events across borders. The consequences of exposing them. They won't just try to silence us, they'll destroy everything we've worked for. Clara looked up then, meeting his gaze for the first time since they'd arrived at the safe house. His face was etched with the same fear she could feel growing inside her, but there was something else too: determination. And maybe, just maybe, a flicker of hope. If they're going to destroy us, then we need to be prepared. Clara said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. We need to strike first. We can't keep waiting for the right moment. Ethan's expression softened, and for a brief moment, the tension between them seemed to dissipate. I knew you'd say that, he said with a small, rueful smile. You're not the type to wait for someone else to act. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. So, what's the plan? How do we take them down? Ethan's smile faded. We don't have a lot of options left. We need to find the key players, the ones pulling the strings behind this operation, and we need to expose them fast. I've been gathering intel, but it's all fragmented. There's one person who can help us put it all together, but she's not exactly someone I can trust easily. Clara raised an eyebrow. Who? Ethan hesitated, glancing at the stack of documents on the table. Her name is Elif. She's a journalist, like Zainab, but she works with some very powerful people. She's been on the inside for a long time, but I've never been able to get a clear read on her. I think she might have the final piece of the puzzle, but meeting her, it's dangerous. She's not someone you approach lightly. Clara stood up, her resolve hardening. If she has the answers we need, we have no choice but to meet her. Ethan seemed to weigh the decision, then nodded. All right, I'll set up a meeting, but we need to be careful. If she's part of this web, she'll have eyes everywhere, and so will we. Later that evening, Ethan and Clara made their way to a nondescript cafe on the outskirts of the city. It was a place that few people knew about, hidden away in a labyrinth of narrow alleys. A perfect meeting spot for people who wanted to remain unseen. The cafe was dimly lit, with a few scattered patrons speaking in low tones. Clara felt a twinge of unease as they approached a corner booth where a woman was already sitting, a glass of wine in front of her. Her back was to them, but Clara could see the sleek black coat she wore, expensive and carefully tailored. Ethan leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. That's Elif, don't let her icy exterior fool you. She's one of the most dangerous people we could be dealing with. Clara gave a nod, taking in a steadying breath. Let's get this over with. Ethan led the way to the booth, and as they reached the table, the woman turned to face them. Her eyes were sharp and calculating, the kind of gaze that could slice through someone in an instant. There was no warmth in her expression, only the quiet confidence of someone who had seen far too much of the world to trust easily. Ethan, Elif said, her voice smooth like velvet, but with an edge that made Clara wary. I didn't expect you to come here. Not with company. Clara stiffened at her tone, but Ethan remained unfazed, sliding into the booth opposite Elif. Clara followed, sitting silently, her eyes fixed on the woman. I need your help, Elif. Ethan said, his tone urgent. There's a network, a group that's been manipulating the government, the media, everything. We're trying to bring them down, but we need the final pieces of the puzzle. Elif's lips curled into a faint smile. And you think I have those pieces? We know you do, Clara interjected, her voice steady. You've been on the inside for a long time. If anyone knows how to take down this operation, it's you. Elif's gaze shifted between the two of them. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she took a sip of her wine, considering their words. I don't do favors, Ethan, she said finally, setting the glass down. I don't work with people who can't be trusted, and I don't take kindly to being used. You're not the first to come to me for help. Clara leaned forward, her voice firm. We're not asking for a favor, Elif. We're asking for the truth. We're asking for your help to stop something that could destroy everything we've worked for. Elif's eyes flicked to Clara, and for a moment Clara saw a flicker of recognition, or was it challenge, in her gaze. You don't know what you're asking for. Elif said, her tone suddenly dark. This isn't just a political game, this is a war. Clara and Ethan exchanged a look, the gravity of Elif's words sinking in. This was no longer about a legal battle or political corruption. They were stepping into a world of shadows, into a war that had been waged long before they'd ever arrived, and they were about to become its next targets. The weight of Elif's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Clara felt the chill creep into her bones as she realized how serious this had become. The world they had just entered was no longer just about politics or injustice. It was about power control, and a game that they had only begun to understand. The cafe was silent, save for the low hum of conversation in the background. Clara kept her eyes fixed on Elif, whose cold gaze had never wavered. She wasn't giving them anything, no hints, no offers of help, nothing. "We're not here to make a deal with you," Clara said, her voice calm but unwavering. "We're here because we need your help to stop this before it escalates further. We know you have the information we need. You've seen how deep this runs." Elif leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping the edge of her wine glass thoughtfully. "You have no idea what you're asking for. This isn't something you can just walk away from. These people, whoever they are, they don't let things like this go. If you push, they'll come after you. And they won't stop until you're gone." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "That's why we need you, Elif. You've been on the inside, you know how they think. You know the way they operate. We can't do this alone." Elif's lips curled into a sardonic smile, though there was little humor in it. "You don't get it, do you? I've been on the inside for too long, I know exactly how they think. That's why I don't work with people like you anymore." Clara's frustration bubbled to the surface, but she controlled it. "We don't have time for games, Elif. Zenep's life is on the line, and so is mine. This is bigger than your past grievances. We're asking you to help us bring them down, to help us expose what they've done." There was a long pause. Elif studied them both, as if weighing her options. Finally she sighed, and set her glass down, the sound sharp in the otherwise quiet room. "You're right," Elif said slowly. "It's bigger than Zenep or even you. There's a reason I'm not involved anymore. The people behind this have their hands in too many places, they have more influence than you can even comprehend." But she stopped, her eyes flicking toward the door. "But I can't just leave it alone, not now. Not when it's this close." Clara leaned in, every instinct telling her to keep pushing. "What do you know? What are they planning?" Elif hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her next words. Then she spoke in a low, dangerous tone. "There's a summit coming up. The politicians and businessmen involved are all gathering in Istanbul next week. It's a chance for them to solidify their power, finalize deals, and make sure no one can interfere with their operations. That's where it all ends, if we don't act before then." Clara felt her stomach tighten. A summit? So everything they've been doing, all the manipulation, it's been leading up to this. "Exactly," Elif replied. "This is the moment where everything is going to come to a head. If we don't expose them before they finalize their plans, they'll have control over everything. This network will be unstoppable." Ethan's jaw tightened. "We don't have much time then, we need to move fast." Clara nodded. "So how do we stop them?" Elif's eyes darkened, and her voice became more serious. "We don't just expose them, Clara. We have to destroy everything they've built. We need to get to the core of their operations, sever their ties, and make sure they can't recover from this." Clara swallowed, her heart racing. "How do we even begin?" Elif stood up, adjusting her coat as she moved toward the door. "Follow me. I'll show you." The night had fallen by the time they reached the outskirts of the city, where Elif led them through a hidden back door into an unmarked building. The air was thick with tension, and Clara felt every inch of the weight on her shoulders. They were no longer just dealing with a corrupt system, they were challenging a vast network of power, and their next move could mean the difference between life and death. Inside the building, Elif showed them a small room filled with high-tech equipment, computers, phones, and surveillance equipment. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and metal. "This is where we start," Elif said, pulling up a series of files on the screen. "We'll need to intercept their communications, find the key players, and figure out where the summit will be held. The goal is to find their weakest point and exploit it." Clara and Ethan exchanged a glance. It felt like they were heading into uncharted waters, and the sense of urgency was palpable. There was no going back from here. As Elif worked, her fingers flying over the keyboard with expert precision, Clara's mind raced. She felt the weight of the decision they had made settling over her. They were in too deep now to back out. But the cost of failure was too great to ignore. "Once we have the summit's details, we can leak the information to the press." Alif said, her voice steady despite the pressure. We'll expose them all, every last one of them. Ethan nodded, and if that doesn't work? Alif's expression darkened, then we'll have to take more drastic measures. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. They were playing a dangerous game, and every moment that passed brought them closer to the precipice. But she had come too far to back down now. The pieces were falling into place, and she wasn't about to let them slip through her fingers. Several hours passed as Alif worked tirelessly, and the glow of the computer screen illuminated their faces in the otherwise dim room. The tension in the air was thick, and Clara could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her. She had to trust Alif. She had to trust that this woman, who had once walked away from this fight, would be the one to lead them to the truth. Finally, Alif straightened up, her face grim. "I've found it," she said, her voice low. "The summit will be held at a private location in the city, a place most people don't even know exists. We don't have much time, but I've secured the list of attendees." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. The summit was their chance to expose everything. But just as she started to think they might have a chance at victory, Alif's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at it, her face suddenly pale. "Get out of here," Alif said urgently. "Now they know we're on to them." The hairs on the back of Clara's neck stood up. "What do you mean? There's no time to explain. They're coming. You have to leave. Now." Before Clara could respond, Alif's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. "Run. Don't look back." Clara and Ethan didn't hesitate. They dashed toward the door, fear surging through their veins. The web they had entered was tightening around them, and there was no escaping it now. They had made their move. And now the consequences were about to unfold. The adrenaline coursing through Clara's veins was like fire. She didn't have to look back to know they were being followed. The sound of footsteps echoed down the darkened alleyways, and every instinct told her they were closing in. She ran faster, her breath sharp in her chest, trying to push past the panic threatening to take over. Ethan was a step behind her, his hand firmly gripping her arm, guiding her through the maze of narrow streets that seemed to go on forever. She could feel the tension between them, the fear in his movements, but she didn't have time to acknowledge it. Not now, not when every second counted. They rounded another corner, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of fog that had settled over the city. Clara's mind raced. They had barely escaped from Alif's safe house, and now they were in the middle of a chase, with unknown pursuers on their tail. Whoever was after them had the resources to track them down. This was no ordinary government operation. "We need to find a way to lose them," Ethan said, his voice strained. "They won't stop until they find us." Clara nodded, her thoughts spinning. They were running out of time. They needed to get to the summit information before their pursuers did. They couldn't let this opportunity slip through their fingers. Ethan grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward an old rusted door. "In here, quickly." Clara didn't hesitate, following him inside. The room was dark, the air stale, and the scent of mildew hung in the air. She could barely make out the outlines of crates and old furniture stacked in corners, but it was enough to hide them for a moment. Ethan closed the door behind them, with a soft click, the sound too loud in the silence. They stood there, panting, trying to calm their breathing, listening for any sound from outside. The faint hum of distant traffic, and the rustle of leaves in the wind were the only things breaking the quiet. "Do you think they saw us?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the darkness. "They're not amateurs. If they didn't see us, they'll track us down through the city. But we need to keep moving, we can't stay here for long." Clara nodded, she knew they didn't have a choice. But the fear gnawing at her was starting to feel like a constant presence at her back. They were being hunted, and there was no telling what lengths their pursuers would go to. She turned to Ethan, her voice low but steady. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, and Clara could see the conflict in his eyes. "I didn't think it would happen like this," he said finally, his voice strained. "I thought we had more time, but I underestimated them. I should have told you sooner." Clara's gaze softened, but the anger still burned beneath the surface. "You should have trusted me, Ethan, you kept so many things from me. You had no idea what I was walking into, and now we're both in this mess." I know, he replied quietly. I thought I was protecting you. You weren't, she said, her voice sharp. You were only protecting yourself. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Clara thought he might say something more. But instead, he simply nodded. His eyes were filled with regret, and Clara could see how torn he was. She wanted to be angry, to lash out at him for everything that had gone wrong, but in the end, they were both in this together. They had to rely on each other now, or neither of them would make it out alive. I'm sorry, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara didn't respond, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know what to say. There was too much hurt, too many unspoken words, and they didn't have the luxury of time. Not anymore. The faint sound of footsteps approaching outside made Clara snap back to reality. She grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward the far corner of the room, behind a stack of crates. They crouched down, listening. The footsteps grew louder, and Clara held her breath, praying that they wouldn't be found. After a few moments, the footsteps passed, their echo slowly fading into the distance. Clara exhaled, but the relief was short-lived. They couldn't stay here. They had to keep moving, and fast. Ethan's eyes met hers, and he nodded. We need to get out of the city. There's a safe house on the outskirts, a place I've used before. It's our only chance.